Hello, and welcome to Sprout Sessions. My name is Vera Flores, and I'll be your host today. I work on the community team here at Sprout, and I'm thrilled to be kicking off sessions with all of you. Our goal with Sprout Sessions is to bring our industry together and arm you with insights to inspire you to take action on your own social strategy. We'll get started in just a moment, but first I want to cover off on a few housekeeping items. Today's session will be a fireside chat as opposed to a typical presentation. These sessions will be recorded and live on our YouTube page. Don't worry, you can access the recording immediately following the presentation. We also encourage all of you to engage with us and your fellow professionals on social by tweeting @SproutSocial or by using the hashtag SproutSessions. This is a digital conference, so be sure to get social with it. Lastly, our speaker has agreed to stick around for 10 minutes following their presentation to answer any questions. To ask questions directly, please use the chat panel to the right of your YouTube screen. You can ask questions throughout the presentation, and we will filter those to our speaker during the Q&A session at the end. Now let's get this session started. Allow me to pass it over to Ben Trinh, Head of Influencer and Marketing Strategy at Postmates.
Hey everyone, this is Ben speaking. Super excited to be here and talk a little bit about what I breathe every single day, a new buzzword in the marketing and social community, which is influencer marketing. I'm stoked to talk about how it has changed the ways that we've thought about marketing, think about PR, and everything else under the umbrella. So I've been at Postmates for a little under a year now, where influencer marketing is a huge part of our strategy and all of our campaigns. Prior to this, I founded my own influencer agency, Bread4. So I've worked with influencers directly a lot. And prior to that, I was at Lyft, the rideshare company, where I was looking over our influencer marketing as well. So I'm excited. I want to give a shout out to Sprout Sessions for hosting and Vera for hosting as well. And I'm excited to chat more.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. We're super excited to talk about this hot topic. Influencer marketing has been a hot topic and on all of the marketing collateral that I've seen about trends in 2018. So we're super excited to talk about this. I think let's just get right to our first question. How have you seen the role of influencers and influencer marketing evolve over the past few years?
Totally. This is a great question, and it's actually changed a lot in the past year, 2017 meaning. Reason being is I've been in influencer marketing for about 4 to 5 years now, and dating back to, let's say 4 years ago, I don't even think influencer marketing was a real term. I think it was more of social media marketing, PR marketing, social engagement, and building a community. And I think that when influencers first arose with the social media world, this could be YouTubers, Instagrammers, etc. A lot of brands tapped into influencers as a way of acquiring new users, boosting sales, getting engagement, things like that. I think the trend over the past year, and we can go into this a little bit later, I think, is building content. Influencers are using their social channels to build actual entertainment and content, and that goes out to their followers. And that becomes a very organic form of marketing, which is what influencer marketing has evolved into in the past few years.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that brief history lesson. I think that it's really important to point out how influencer marketing has evolved over time, especially with its relationship to social. And I think that flows really well into our next question. When do you leverage larger reach or celebrity influencers versus micro influencers?
Yeah, this is probably the question I get the most. I think the difference here is celebrity influencers are folks that if they're walking down the street, you might know them, you might have seen them on TV, you might have heard their music, seen them in a movie, etc. Versus micro influencers may not have that universal clout. However, they are still very influential to the folks around them locally. So in my past experience working with a ton of brands focus on micro influencers when they're trying to really get granular on their focus and target. For example, let's say you're a brand in Texas, for example, and you want to make sure that your brand gets exposure to folks in Texas. You might forego the route of working with larger celebrity type figures for whatever reason, whether it be budget or whatever, or the main reason is you want to specifically work with a local influencer out of Texas. Let's say, for example, a professor who teaches at the University of Texas. And the reason being is to get that reach over the demographic you want to target specifically. That's the main reason people focus on micro-influencers versus larger celebrity influencers.
Awesome. That's a really great point that you make. I think that it's really important to note that when you're focusing on a small geo-specific community, you want to really reach for your micro-influencers. I recently read a study that said that micro-influencers are 10 times more likely to influence an in-store purchase over a celebrity. And that really speaks to how micro-influencers create a smaller draw for a hyper-local, like an in-store purchase, as opposed to a big brand celebrity reach when you're trying to do a national or global campaign.
100%. There's a time for both, but like you said, there have been studies, and I've seen the same ones done, where micro-influencers' engagement on their content and social posts are a lot higher.
Awesome. Yeah, that really solidifies your point. So our next question, how do you leverage influencers differently to affect brand and to affect subscriptions and revenue?
That's an interesting question. It kind of goes back to the previous point, the first point we talked about how influencer marketing has kind of evolved over the past couple of years. I know that a lot of brands, let's say 2 to 3 years ago, even 4 years ago, are seeing influencers just as another marketing channel similar to the ones they already have. Paid media, digital marketing, putting ads out there, etc. They view influencers as a way where you make an influencer do a post and you boost your revenue and subscriptions because of that. That is definitely one way you can use influencer marketing. That is usually tied to things like if you're spending X number of dollars, you're expecting X number of return. And that's kind of one model. The other side goes more into the content we were talking about. And this content is pretty versatile because it can be anything that is used. It could be video content from YouTube that you can repurpose for your own social media and digital ads, etc., to things that are a lot more engaging and that has virality to it. So they're a little different. I think there are different goals behind both ways, and there are different teams working on both things. But that just speaks a little bit to how influencer marketing is so versatile.
Awesome. I really like how you hone in on how influencer marketing can be cross-functional. And I think we oftentimes talk about how brands should repurpose content for different marketing campaigns. And I think that influencer marketing can really tap into that as well. And next question is, do you see influencers and evangelists as the same or different?
They are different. And the best way to explain this would be that an evangelist can be, an ambassador, a spokesperson for a brand or company, an advocate. I'm an advocate to a lot of personal brands that I like, for restaurants that I like. The difference with influencers is there is a level of separation in influence. So influencers are the ones where if they say something amazing about a restaurant, for example, you may have a lot of folks going to that restaurant that's outside of their first degree network, if that makes sense. So that's kind of the difference between influencers on that level and then being an evangelist, which is more along the lines of being an ambassador and an advocate. That
makes sense. I think that more and more companies are turning to advocates or ambassador programs, but there's a fine line in that influencers are being utilized for the reach that they can have or that they do have, especially when it comes to social content and you're looking for the virality of what they can offer. Whereas evangelists are really great and you want to tap them for smaller campaigns and you want to utilize them. And I think that with evangelists, and love to hear your opinion on this, evangelists or advocates, you have to foster that relationship a little bit more. You have to create that community aspect with them before you can ask them to do anything.
Yep, I agree 100%. And on that point, what a lot of brands should realize is that their existing customer base, the folks that have already made a purchase or is signed up and has that loyal aspect to them, they are already evangelists to a certain degree. So those are the folks that a lot of brands should focus on when thinking about influencer marketing as well, because that's just an extension of it, right? So that's something that I think a lot of brands haven't focused on, but I think they will start doing that this year.
Awesome. And do you think that influencers should also have existing relationships with the brand? Or is this something that you're kind of, when you're reaching out to influencers, that they're aligned with what your brand is doing, but doesn't necessarily have an existing relationship?
I think it can go both ways. That's a great question. I think that every and any brand should have leverage in the sense of they should be able to go out and handpick an influencer that they feel fits their brand. Now, this doesn't mean that the influencer has to know about their brand or has used their product before, right? There's an educational piece to it. But it definitely helps for an influencer to understand what the brand fit is, and then to go after those that fit that brand, regardless of the fact of if they have used their service or product before or not.
That's great insight, Ben. I think this is super helpful for anybody who's trying to launch an influencer program from the very start. So moving into everyone's favorite topic, budgeting, our next question is, what % of your marketing budget is dedicated to influencer marketing?
Yeah, this is also a very popular question that I get pretty often, and it's a tricky one because there is no right answer, right? I think the best way to approach influencer marketing is thinking about it as an experiment or a test if this is your first time. I think it's really daunting because influencer marketing can be viewed as something that is very sexy and glamorous on the forefront, but you're not able to measure exactly if you're going to get your return. So it's daunting because it's hard to ask your team or your team to make the decision of creating a new budget just for influencer marketing. However, if you start thinking about influencer marketing as just an extension of your existing marketing channels, because of the versatility that we talked about, you can take an existing marketing campaign. Let's say you're spending X number of dollars on online marketing or social media marketing. Simply reallocate a slice of that, maybe a fourth or a fifth or an eighth, and use that for influencer marketing. And I think when you start doing that, it becomes less daunting and entering influencer marketing becomes a lot easier. So to answer your question, it's hard to tie a percentage to it. And I've worked with brands that have, built full marketing campaigns quarter over quarter on influencer marketing, where that is the basis of it, to other brands that have existing campaigns, but use influencer marketing as a boost and a lever after they're executing. So it's hard to say.
I know it's a challenging question, and of course, it's going to vary for every brand. But I really like your point about utilizing a segment of a marketing budget for a particular campaign for influencer marketing, maybe as a test. So you wouldn't have to launch a full-on influencer program from the start. You could actually integrate it into another marketing campaign and see what happens there and gather some learnings. So that's a really great point that you make. Thank you.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next question, why do you think proving ROI for influencer marketing continues to be a challenge? I know we touched upon this a little bit, but if you could dig deep just a little bit further, that would be awesome.
Yes, I think the difficult part is because traditionally with not just influencer marketing, but all kinds of marketing in our data-driven world, as another buzzword, we are so used to measuring things week over week, right? I'm sure a lot of folks that are tuning in now are measured on results of a campaign week over week, especially in the marketing world. Let's say, again, if you're putting in X number of dollars to a campaign this week, by the end of the week, you want to see X number of customers come in for your spend. And if you don't see that hitting your averages or your company targets, you may think that influencer marketing is failing. I think that is a really dangerous point in influencer marketing, a misconception that people are having. Influencer marketing is something that you should be rolling out over time. Kind of going back to the whole evangelist and ambassador point. No ambassador and evangelist is built overnight, right? An influencer is an ambassador and an evangelist that has a lot more reach. So to get them to do something this week and expect results immediately at the end of the week may not be the best way to measure the return. That is kind of why there's a challenge there, because of how we're traditionally raised to think about measuring marketing.
Definitely. And I think that influencer marketing is definitely a big awareness play as well. You're trying to reach the masses with a targeted message, but it can be hard to quantify that. And I think that this might continue being a bit of a challenge, but will probably evolve over the next few years.
Yep.
More on ROI. What key metrics do you think define ROI for influencer marketing campaigns across social and mobile?
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking this question, because it gives another opportunity to go off the previous question and paint a larger picture here. So the easy answer is that for influencer marketing, you can obviously measure things through sales, downloads from tracking links, right? Things like that, things that are specifically tangible. You can also measure things if you're focused on brand building and more on the content side. You can focus on measuring things based off of the number of likes of something, comments, engagement, shares, plays, things like that. And also, if you want to dig deeper, there are tons of studies and research that is done for unaided awareness for your brand. I think that the best way to approach this, if you're focusing on influencer marketing for the first time, is to not let the first round of results of your influencer marketing campaign dictate too much about whether you think it's successful or not successful. For example, let's say you're doing an influencer marketing campaign and you get X number of likes, X number of plays for it. If this is your first time focusing on this, it's hard to say that it is successful or not successful. However, you should let that campaign and the learnings from it dictate your second campaign you might do for influencer marketing. And once you get those second round of results, you now have something to measure against, which is your first campaign, right? So now you have a little bit more to work with in terms of reporting and understanding. And as you go on, you can imagine your third influencer marketing campaign or your fourth one. You're really able to tell from there whether you are doing better, doing worse, or if this is something you want to continue. So those are kind of the metrics you should be keeping top of mind when thinking about how to measure influencer marketing campaigns.
Thanks, Ben. I like how you highlight that you can't just learn anything from a one-off. And I think that kind of talks to any marketing strategy and gaining learnings from a very small data set, even when we're talking about like small time frames. And I think that it's really important to highlight that you kind of have to do things a couple times to understand what, or define rather, what is success.
No, totally. And it goes to our everyday actions. Countless times I've seen a brand, let's say on Instagram, scrolling through my feed, right? And I may not pay attention to it until the third or fourth time that I see it, because it's registered in my mind and the seed is planted the first time I see it. But because there's an educational piece that needs to be built on that, it may not affect me as a consumer until the fourth or fifth time I see it, maybe a week or 2 weeks later.
Awesome. I really love that example of repetition and how important that is. So looking forward, what do you recommend to ensure branded posts and content are compliant without appearing too disparate from influencers' own branded content?
Yeah, I would recommend, well, first and foremost, the reason why there is a huge focus on being compliant with the FTC and all of that with influencer marketing is because you have to realize influencer marketing has become so big and such a hot topic that every brand is at least thinking about it, right? That's the reason why there's such a focus there and why I'm bullish on it and think that every brand should be focusing on influencer marketing. To stay compliant and make sure you're playing by the rules, I think it's really important for you to establish the mindfulness of this to the influencers that you're working with. That's kind of like housekeeping. It's kind of like saying that I made sure that I told all of the influencers I'm working with that they have to be compliant by making it very clear to their followers that there is a paid relationship here or a partnership here. I think the best way to go about it is to try to build it into an organic way. And this is just an example. But for example, your influencer can say things on their social posts such as, today I've partnered up with X retail brand to bring you X promotion. This way, they're clearly defining that there is a relationship there and that they're working with X retail brand. Once you do that, you kind of put up the safety for yourself and for the influencer to stay compliant, which is really, really important now.
Definitely. Those are really great points about highlighting that partnership so that people know up front. So our last and final question of today's session is, what trends do you see impacting influencer marketing in the year ahead?
This is a great question. I think that I touched on this a tiny bit, but the trend that has happened over the past year is that brands are starting to focus on influencers, less about pushing promo codes and pushing URL links and boosting sales, but more about content and engagement. I think the reason being is brands are realizing that they need to humanize themselves. And the best way to humanize your brand is to work with influential humans. Instead of going the route traditionally of throwing ads online and targeting the right folks, once you start working with influencers to build great and organic, authentic content, you are now humanizing your brand, and that connection is a lot easier for the consumer. I think this trend is going to evolve and it's going to grow over time. I also think, jumping a step ahead, looking 3, maybe 4 years down the line, who knows if influencer marketing might even still be the term, right? That would be a decade with the term. It could, at the end of the day, just go back to social media marketing, or it could be PR, which is what I think it is at the end of the day. So things are changing. Influencer marketing is super versatile, like I mentioned, and it's growing fast. So I recommend everyone look into it if you haven't yet.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. Definitely agree on how influencer marketing has evolved, and it's not a stagnant strategy. And I think that it'll just continue to see changes as the year progresses. And it'll be interesting to see how many more silos influencer marketing is breaking down. So friends, you're welcome to stick around for the next 10 minutes to ask any questions you have. And remember, you'll be able to access the recording of this session following the completion of the Q&A. So let's get started and get to our first question. So Ben, we have a question from Jared on YouTube, and he asks, any tips for identifying micro-influencers?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think the best way to establish micro-influencers or influencers in general is to list out a bunch of questions for your own brand, starting with what is the demo, the target customer you are looking for or consumer you are looking for. Reason being is oftentimes a lot of people think that their target consumer is also the target influencer you should be working with. That may not necessarily be the case for many reasons. I'll give you an example. A good example is if you are focused on, let's say, a male demo that is focused on sports, right? The person they're following could be someone on the opposite end. It could be someone that is female who doesn't have to do with sports. So I think the best way to think about this is to really identify yourself as a brand and what you're looking for and differentiate what the target consumer is and what that target influencer would be. Of course, to other things such as geography and what markets you're focused on.
Thanks, Ben. Those are really great points. So moving on, we have another question about influencer marketing and how can nonprofits and membership associations best use influencer marketing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the hurdle for a lot of nonprofits and organizations in that front for influencer marketing is they think that all influencers are very expensive to work with. And this kind of ties into the first question of you really have to identify and look for the influencers that share values to your brand. I think there are probably a ton of influencers out there that would love to work with nonprofits, especially if it is something that they hold dear to themselves. So if you find that like point with any of the influencers, they're more likely to work with you. And this could be for a number of things, right? This could be through social media and advocacy. This could be through content, whether it's a blog or newsletter. This could also be getting influencers to show up to to an event, a nonprofit event. So influencer marketing can be used in many ways, but I've definitely seen a bunch of influencers, whether it's micro up to celebrity figures, that have worked with nonprofits before.
Definitely agree that influencer marketing is a great tie-in for nonprofits. I think that if you have any cause that's doing social good, there are plenty of people who want to tap into that and spread the good word about what you're doing. So I think that influencer marketing is a great way for nonprofits to utilize their marketing budgets or to create relationships with ambassadors and start spreading the word about what they're doing. So another question from YouTube from Stephanie, and they ask, as a B2B company, should we still target individuals or should we target client brands that we work with?
Great question. I think as a B2B brand, it depends a lot about what your specific product and service is. But I think there's a universe where you can work with both. That's kind of the short version of the answer. But I've definitely seen B2B brands tap into actual individuals as an influencer, but also tap into organizations and groups as an influencer group. And that's something we could dive deeper into at a later time. But in short, there's a world where both can coexist.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. So our last question of the day comes from Ian. And in marketing, things don't always go as planned. So they ask, what should you do when your influencers, micro or otherwise, don't create the content you expect either in quality or quantity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've myself, from personal experience, have ran into those. My takeaways and learnings from moments like that is, like many campaigns, you have to set yourself up to adapt quickly. And I think the best way to prevent influencers from, pushing out content that you may not like at the end of the day is to be there next to them. An influencer should be more of a partner and less of a transactional relationship. You should be able to give guidance on what the influencer content should be. You should also have the option of reviewing the influencer content before it's pushed out so that you can provide feedback. And if you're not doing that, then you're probably increasing the likelihood that you might get thrown off or be surprised. So I think that communication with the influencer, the transparency, and viewing them more as a partner rather than a transactional relationship is the way to go.
Awesome. I really, really like your point about creating a process. So reviewing, making sure deadlines are in place, but also seeing them as a partner as opposed to a transactional campaign really makes the person, the influencer rather, feel like they're doing something with the brand and working with them as opposed to just being tasked with something. So thank you so much to Ben for all of his great insights. And if you had any questions that we didn't get to this Q&A, please feel free to reach out to Ben on Twitter. I'm sure he will be happy to answer your questions as he's an authority and expert in influencer marketing. On behalf of Sprout, we want to thank all of you for attending this session. Keep your eyes peeled. We're going to compile some of the major takeaways from this session and share it with all of you. Feel free to continue the conversation on social media using #SproutSessions. From all of us at Sprout, thank you for joining in.